passes out of there.
Okay.
And where do you want me to look? Straight at the camera.
Welcome to the Australian Calabrese Cultural Association program Sono Calabrese, which is a program where we have conversations with members of the community who tell us about their experiences, not only for themselves but also their ancestors. And today we're very fortunate because we've got as our guest Councillor Mark Eckel from the Mildura Council, and as you may gather from the name, is not 100% Calabrese in that his father obviously was German. But thank you, Mark, for taking the time to speak with us, and welcome to the program. And firstly, as I've said, your father wasn't Italian, he was German.
Yes, well, from German descent, they came to Queensland in the early 1800s.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and do you know, when did your parents marry?
They married in 1949, I believe. Yeah.
And any siblings?
My sister, and poor old Susan, she passed away, had a real battle with cancer over 6 years. And so she passed away a good 10 years ago now.
Now, your mother's Calabrese.
Yeah.
And what was her maiden name?
Araco.
Well, that's, as I understand it, a pretty famous name here in Mildura.
Well, it certainly is. Made famous by her brother, Tom Araco, who was a pioneering retailer here in Mildura. And he's had a very colourful life, Uncle Tom, and he was actually interned during the Second World War.
Because he wasn't a citizen.
That's right.
Yeah, there were a few.
Yeah. And he played a leading role in the camp just down at Hatter National Park where they had them, and so he was there, and Mum was born in 1927.
Oh, so she's a young 96.
Yeah, down in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And and my grandparents, Vincenzo and Grazia Araco, came from Verapodio in Calabria.
Right.
And as per normal in those days, Nunna came out on the boat, on the ship.
Yeah.
And she said, I'll never forget this, Mum telling me that she was in the hull of the ship because they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And she had the most horrific voyage to Australia where she was vomiting all the time, sick, poor thing. It must have been absolutely terrible. You can just imagine.
And when did she arrive in Australia?
She arrived in the early 20s.
Right. So
And she came over with Uncle Tom and Auntie Mary.
Right.
With Teresa, as they called her Mary.
So your Uncle Tom had been here for 20 years.
Yes.
When the Second World War
Yes.
started.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding that, he was still interned.
Yes.
For how long was he interned?
Well, for the duration of the war. Yeah.
And it might be different here, but for example, in Melbourne, there were people who were interned and they were allowed out in order to do work to produce food, vegetables and fruit.
Yeah.
And sort of thing. Did the same thing happen here?
I can't tell you categorically, but it's funny that you should raise that because yes, he was allowed out a few times. So I believe from letters that he wrote to his wife, my Auntie Rose, and but they're very interesting times because at that particular time too there was a very vocal demonstration down the main street of Mildura, just outside what he had at the time was a fruit shop.
Right.
And he was there protecting his produce from these people that were protesting about the war and
about the fact that he was Italian.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So, I don't think that there was any retribution or anything like that from the local citizens towards because you got to take this in consideration. Without the Italians, without the Greeks, Without these people coming to this area, we would not have Mildura the way it is today.
Absolutely, not just Mildura, I think the whole of Australia. But what's interesting is that the similar things happened in Melbourne. I know, for example, a person who's a lawyer, and his father was a lawyer, but they were Italian, and in fact, during the war, they invaded his practice and set fire to the books.
Right, wow.
Which I think would have been a fairly, traumatising event.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether how did your uncle feel about his experience of being...
Well, he never spoke, he never talked about it.
Yeah, well,
and you should interview his son, Vince.
Yeah, well, I'd love
one
to.
day about that.
I'd love to. Because the interesting thing is, again, that they've changed, as you say, for 20 years he was an accepted member of the community.
Yes.
And then because of the war, suddenly he becomes an enemy alien who's got to be interned. And
they were cutting wood, actually, that's what they were doing.
And the reason I'm pointing it out is that I think it's part of an untold history. In the sense that if you read a lot of the history books about Australian history, you don't read about the internments, not just of Italians, right, but Greeks and Dutch and any...
Well, it happened quite extensively in the Riverland for the Germans, of course.
Yeah. And, of course, your father was German. Tell us about your childhood. How did you cope with having... a Calabrese mum.
I'm going to be really truthful here. And my mum's not going to like this.
Okay, well, please.
But we never lived within any Italian communities as I was growing up because my father was a naval officer.
Right.
So and serving in the Navy.
Right.
So he was overseas for 4 to 5 months of every year.
Right.
So Mum raised us on her own, really, for those times. And as I said, we lived in Sydney, we lived in Townsville, we lived in Adelaide, we lived in Darwin for a couple of years, and so we were never amongst Italians. Mum never professed that she could talk Italian until we came down visiting at Christmas, and it was parliamo Italiano all the time.
Yeah.
But it was Calabrese, a real dialect, Calabrian language, and she really hid that from us, and I don't know. I don't think she was ashamed of being an Italian, but it never ever came out in any conversation within the communities that we lived.
That's not unusual, quite frankly, because, as you know, the official government policy at the time was assimilation.
Yes. And
people felt obliged to fit in and, become new Australians.
Yes.
And that meant, in a way, neglecting their origin or their heritage because it was a lot easier to cope. And what you've described is that when they come back and they're together with other Italians, they do speak the Calabrese.
Yeah, they do.
And
the cooking and the whole lifestyle.
And interestingly, a lot of the people subsequently do revert back to their Calabrese origin. I speak of Calabrese because that's what we're interested in, but it's a common experience amongst not just Calabrese but Italians and any other immigrants, right? When they reclaim their heritage, which is, I think, what has really changed and what is really important now, that back in the 50s it wasn't really cool to be Italian. Right. Or German.
No. But we know that at school because we're all called wogs and all that sort of stuff. And it was very prevalent in Mildura. I came to Mildura for 1 year of schooling whilst my father was overseas one particular time, and then we moved to Sydney. But that year, is indelibly in my memory as being a year of victimisation, the nuns at the time were very strict, and of course, well, I'm not saying that we were good boys all the time. Don't worry about that. We were probably ruffians as well, but it's not. I don't look at schooling as a happy time for me, and no matter where I went to school.
Because what, you were considered to be German, a wog, or
no,
or combination?
No, it was a funny situation. It mainly happened within the community of Mildura, which is really strange because the prevalence of the Italian population here, but then when we moved away, it was more that they knew what we never spoke of our German heritage. It's always the Italian heritage. That was very strong. It was very strong with me. I loved it, and I didn't feel that I should hide it.
Right.
So, the Italian food taken to school, big sandwiches, all this sort of thing. And I loved it. So I never hid it at all. So I suppose I brought it upon myself. But then we used to visit every year at Christmas. No matter where we lived, we came back to Mildura and spent time with my grandparents, and of course my nonna, she couldn't speak any English all her life.
Or she said she couldn't.
Well, she probably 2 or 3 words. No, honestly, she couldn't put a sentence together. All that, because mate, it was that in those days, whether we like it or not, the women were hidden away. They're in the house.
But a lot of women...
They're house duties.
Yeah, that's true. But a lot of women who actually felt that they had a decreased status because they came from Italy to Australia said they didn't speak English but understood a lot of it and just refused to...
Well, that might be true, but I can tell you it wasn't true in my nonna's case. So she was real...
Just refused to learn.
The old Italian, and I don't know whether that's... I shouldn't say that, but that's the way I knew, and it still stays with me all my life that I couldn't sit down and converse with her.
Because you didn't speak Calabrese?
No. And I only knew a couple of dialect words to get me through a conversation. But then when she was in hospital permanently, and I'd go and visit her every day, they were the times when, because she always had her faculties, like my mother's 96, 97 next year, and she's got her faculties like that, So it was a shame that I didn't have that relationship, and I blame my mother for that, because she should have been able, she was competent enough in the language to teach me, but this hidden situation,
Have you ever discussed that with your mother? Why?
Yes.
What does she say?
What does she say? You'll have to meet my mother. She just didn't think that it was important.
Right.
Because we never lived within Italian communities.
Right.
And it was only at the occasion of going home for Christmas that we got together.
Because, as I understand, you were born in Chelsea, in Melbourne. And when did you come to Mildura?
Well, as I said, we're going back every year from 1956, and then one year we came here, and I was invited to a dance, and by an Italian family with a daughter. Oh. And so I went along, and then we were pen pals.
Right.
And then I was working in the PMG at the time,
right,
and in Sydney, and then I got a transfer over to Adelaide to be closer, and then I got a transfer to Mildura at the telephone exchange in Mildura,
right,
and that was in October of 1974, and we were married in April of 1975.
Oh, well done. So
3 sons, Matthew, Damon, and Joshua.
And what do they do? Are they?
Yeah, they're all over Australia.
Right. And you're now in radio, as I can see from the note on,
the
on your shirt,
yeah.
the emblem there. When did you get involved in radio?
Well, that was going back to when I was in the club days, and you'd be interested in this, and so would your listeners. It was when the poker machines were in New South Wales, but not in South Australia or Victoria, and the pokey tours used to come to the Wentworth Club, and I was the marketing manager there.
Oh.
So I was putting these tours together to bring people over to play the pokies and to enjoy their weekend in our area. So I started in radio then, promoting the club. And also going on radio in Adelaide and promoting the club over there, a nighttime talkback session that I had permanently. And then one day, to make a long story short, one of the radio owners approached me and said, would you like to come and do a show? So I did, and then that led to me doing the breakfast show on community radio for about, 8 years. And then I started, then we went from there to a commercial radio station where I was invited to do the breakfast show. Then I said, well, I'll only come on one pretence, that we can stream Oz Country Music Radio out to your audience and simulcast. And we did that. And then in recent times, in the last nearly 3 years, coming up in June, I decided to take it to my home, and I broadcast 24 hours.
Right. And you're obviously a fan of Elvis, isn't you?
Yes, I am, but that's not where the income comes from. The income comes from promoting independent artists around Australia. So it's not predominantly country, but not necessarily.
And so what? You, these are unknown artists that.
Yes, independent artists that are promoting and want themselves known worldwide. Yeah. And as you know, and everybody else knows these days, if you stream, well, you've got a worldwide audience, and they're only too pleased to come on board. And I have a Facebook page, Mark Eckel Oz Country Music Radio, a music page, and so that's a complimentary thing to the radio broadcast.
Yeah. So am I correct that you've been living in Mildura since 74 when you married?
Yes, that's right.
Continuously?
Yes.
Well, tell us about the changes that you've seen between 74 and 2023 in the Mildura community.
Well, fancy throwing that to me, Vince, just off the cuff. There's been quite transitional change, really, particularly from the growth of Mildura. And I think when I came there, it might have been a population of around about, in the municipality, of about 30,000. Now we're 55,000. I was particularly concerned at the time about the growing prevalence of crime. That was so I decided to stand for local government. And that was 22 years ago now, and a lady that was the mayor at the time approached me and said, would you like to be on her ticket?
So you've been a councillor roughly since 2000.
2000, yes, yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned crime, and let's be clear, what I think is the false stereotype of the Calabrese is that everyone's a criminal. And I don't know whether you read it in July last year when the Australian Federal Police held a press conference and this assistant commissioner said, they lead a low-profile life, but be careful because they could be living next door to you. Yeah. My own experience is that 99.99% of Calabrese are law-abiding and don't commit crime, and in fact the criminal statistics that the police and the states keep verify that.
Yeah.
But there's this image that has been perpetuated, and one of the things we'd like to do is to prove that it's a false image. But it's interesting that you say you were concerned about crime and that led you into standing for election and locally. So.
Yeah, and there was just one term that I didn't make it, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. It was the CCTV cameras that I was a passionate advocate for in the streets, for the streets, and that took one term. I was voted out the next term, and then I came back and fought for it again. and we have them now, and they've served a great purpose, and so that was accomplished. And then I've held the tourism portfolio for a long time, and events, bringing events to Mildura and creating major events and that. But just going back to what you were saying in regards to the Italians and crime, and you're right, 99.5% are law-abiding, but this is an historic recording today. So we can't hide behind the fact that at that particular time, growing drugs was pretty prevalent in Mildura, and unfortunately, the Italians, along with other denominations, were delving in that particular area and growing them, and that caused great distress amongst the Italian community that are law-abiding, because we were tarred with the same brush.
Well, that's a
point. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly.
Very unfortunate. So,
do you think that's changed? I mean...
Oh, yes, significantly.
Yeah? In what way?
Oh, yeah. Well, in those days, I don't know. I think, and this is only my personal opinion, I think people turn to that sort of crime because they find that working for a living is too hard. Now, we've got a parallel here. We've got a parallel of the Italians that work really hard and have built this community in Mildura, and they're horticulturalists. They work day and night, the whole family on the block. Even when your children were brought up, they came home from school, they went out to the vineyard to pick or to roll on, depending what part of the season it was. So they were working very, very hard. And through the transition at that time, they were even purchasing properties alongside. They were developing wines, and they were introducing the cuisine, that Italian cuisine, to not only to Mildura but to the world, as Stefano Di Pieri is doing at the moment. But that was before Stefano's time, and so they were working hard. So when you say so these, lots of them were young people, right? Were growing this. They chose that way, that pathway to life, rather than the hard work of their parents and their grandparents.
Because they thought it was a bit easier, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, not perhaps, but in the end they didn't, because in the end, of course, they were put in jail, and it was pretty well wiped out in this area.
Yeah. Have you been to Calabria?
Not to Calabria. I tell you, it's interesting.
Yeah.
My wife, my first wife, her father was killed on a motorbike, giving a lift to a person and hit by a tram in Melbourne.
Right.
And he was Calabrese, but her stepfather, Leo Camarotto, was from the north.
Right.
From Treviso.
All right. Yeah.
So when I married her, and he worked on the block, and I used to help him and all that sort of stuff, and we went overseas, and we went to his hometown, and I actually slept in the bed where he was born, in a little place called Lugo, and it's in Ravenna, and then we went up to Treviso where his sister was, and they showed us around. And we didn't have the money in those days, because we'd only been married. We only had small children. That's right. We had to leave them at home with my mother. They were 3 and 5. We were only overseas for about a month, and so we never had the money to travel around. Yeah. So we were dependent on family over there to show us a good time, and we did. It was absolutely fantastic going to Padua, and
that's beautiful.
Yeah, really nice, and Venice. And,
Did your mother ever go back or go to?
No.
So that explains.
No, it should be.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you're now involved in tourism and trying to get people to visit Mildura?
Yes, well, it's all started with the Mildura Country Music Festival, and that's how I got involved in promoting country music, and it was one of the biggest, not one of the biggest, it was the biggest independent festival in the world, went for 10 days, and I was a part of that in the early days, and was on the board of that later on, and then, of course, I had this passion of putting together events and helping the community to put together events, and we had the Davis Cup in that time. The only time the Davis Cup was played in regional Australia was in Mildura on our beautiful tennis courts down there, and we had jazz festivals, and part of the jazz festival lineup throughout Australia, and then of course with the advent of the Italian influence of Stefano's brother, who came out from Italy.
That's the organist.
Yes, he came to see me, and I was a councillor at the time, and I took him into the mayor's office, and he created a musical festival that was here in Mildura that expressed the Italian heritage in music, and he had it in Bendigo, and it was terrific.
It was, and he's a really great.
He's back in town, and it's his birthday. He's going to be celebrated in Mildura.
Oh, right.
So there's a little bit of a lead for you.
The reason I ask about tourism is that one of the things that Calabria at the moment is interested in is promoting more tourism from other countries into Calabria, and one of the issues that they're confronting is that I don't think they know what will attract people, and that's why I was interested in your experience. What you're saying effectively is that if you plan an event which is well publicised, presumably that might attract people.
But the other issue that I'd like to approach too is that I'm very big into sister city relationships,
right?
And that is a fantastic way of getting two communities together from different nations. And I don't know if you know, but the sister city arrangement was brought about by President Eisenhower in the 1950s when he was looking at bringing nations together, but avoiding the political nature, but bringing communities together. So we have got sister city in China, Dali, and I've been there. I went there as the mayor of Mildura. We've got a sister city in Japan, and we've got a sister city in America too. So what I think we should do, we should really have a sister city in Italy. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we had in Verapoldio?
Calabria anyway.
In Calabria. No, there's got to be a town.
It's
got to be a town.
There's plenty of towns.
Yeah, I know. But we've got Verapoldio. We've got Verapoldio grapes over here. You know that, don't you? Yeah, well, they're from.
Well, let me tell you this. The association is holding a conference in Calabria in September of this year, right? Okay. Between the 19th and the 21st of September. The conference will be in Reggio, but if you can make it and bring along your idea of a sister city, that'd be great. And I'll go to the town that you want to make with you, if you like. And because I agree with you that it's like everything else. Really, everything's about communication.
Yeah, Verapoldio might be too small to be a sister city because you've got to be financially, and the Reggio might be the way to go.
Well, I think Reggio would be great. Probably even a place like Crotone, which is on the eastern side.
Right.
But Reggio, well, if you get to Reggio, you'll see it's a beautiful.
Yes.
Physically, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I know lots of people that live in Mildura from descendants.
Absolutely phenomenal. And if you come along and we can convince them to become a sister city, that might help both Mildura and Calabria in terms. So let us know. Okay. And I'll send you the details.
Well, I'm going to retire from council. I think 20 years is enough. So I've got 18 months left. So coming September, we've got until the next year. I've been known to push things pretty quickly if I get onto it, but I have to get the favour, of course, of our council.
Yeah.
But there's no reason, and we've got Stefano De Pietri that's on that's a councillor.
Oh, he's on the council.
He's on
also
council,
now.
yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So I'll talk to Stefano and in September, and it's held over there, is it?
Yeah, the conference is
fantastic.
Between the 19th and the 21st of September.
Okay.
And we've got.
And what's that conference? What's it called?
Well, it's the Australian Calabrese Cultural Association International Conference.
Oh, okay.
And we've got speakers lined up at the moment. Some of them you may have heard. One of them is Anna Sergi, who's a professor at Exeter University. Another one is a professor from Melbourne, Teresa De Fazio.
Right.
Another is a professor from San Diego, Stephen Sacco. And we've got two professors from Calabria. One's a historian, the other one's an archaeologist. They're going to talk about the history of Calabria and the culture of Calabria. And one of the issues, and that's why we've asked Professor Sergi to come along, is that to confront the issue of criminality, commerce and culture, and what one affects the other. And she's got a view, and we've got also, in English it's a prosecutors, but in Italian they're actually a magistrate that conducts the investigation and prosecute, who will speak about that as well. And also we're looking at tourism, so we're hoping to bring someone from Australia that can tell them what needs to be done to promote tourism, and if you're there then you'd be ideally situated to assist them, and hopefully it'll result in being able to facilitate greater ties culturally and commercially between Australia and Calabria, because you probably know, but there are 6 million people of Calabrese origin outside Calabria and 2 million in Calabria, so the market is a lot greater externally than it is internally. But and I think we also want to talk about the experiences of the diasporas. For example, like you say, your mother never spoke Italian to you and never spoke Calabrese to you, which is fair enough. In others,
she'll never see this, thank God.
Well, if I get to meet her, I'll tell her.
And she'll tell you, I can tell you.
Well, that's good. It'll be an interesting interview. But and others, I said before, live two lives. Internally in the house, they spoke Calabrese, the food is obviously Calabrese.
Yeah.
Outside the house, it's all Australian or English.
Well, my wife always says she loves going over to Mum's place and eating, because she said your mother turns a feast from nothing.
Well, that's very true, and very healthy as well. It doesn't need to be the thing. And what, in terms of the council and your position in it, 20 odd years is a long time. You never got sick of it at any time? Yeah.
Not really. Not really. What I was always very interested in was that when my term was up and the elections were building for the next term, and I had to stand for re-election, I always used to look around for candidates, because you have to have. Look, you've got to have different. You've got to have a council that have got different expertise in different areas that come together, because that's really makes a wonderful council. And I was always looking for people that were of good standing, honest, hardworking, had knowledge in certain areas that I didn't have that knowledge in, so we could complement each other. And I was lucky enough to come across those people in the community. Stefano was one that I reached out to. Jason Modica, that became the mayor. I reached out to Jason as well, and in actual fact, three of the councillors are on at the moment from myself, and another one, Ali Kappa, was the local, ended up being the local member, and a fantastic local member as well, and she was my deputy mayor. So that's what kept the energy going. But also, I would initiate something within council, a new policy, and I wanted to see it through. So that was my main motivation.
And you say you're not going to stand next elections.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there's people that are pressing me, but I think that by that time it'll be 22 years. I'm 71 now, 72
right.
in.
Well, you're due to retire.
But that's right.
Who knows?
I'm due to retire. I'm due to retire, and I've just started up this 24/7 radio station.
The other thing I'd like you to tell us is, you personally, how did you feel? Did you feel that you were Italian, German, Australian?
Always very, very proud of being from Italian heritage.
Yeah.
No mistake about that whatsoever. Yeah. And I still love. I love hearing the Italian language. I love. I tried to go to Italian courses. I'm a bit dopey in that area, I think. Anyway, in language, some people take up language easy.
Yeah, they do.
I find it difficult.
Italian, I think, except for the verb and all the rest of it, but the fact that it's phonetic makes it a bit easier.
Yeah, to learn. So what else? Oh yes, and I love Italian food. So and I love mixing with Italians. So. Unfortunately, the bocce clubs have closed down. Now, that's a real shame for our district, because that was wonderful. That got the Italian community together, and you'd hear them talk and play briscola.
Well, briscola.
Briscola, that's what it was.
Briscola. I meant to ask you that too, because what has become clear is that a lot of the younger people don't participate. You mentioned bocce clubs, but the other clubs altogether. And that's obviously the experience here in Mildura. What do you think? Why do you think they're not? And I mean, even your own children, do they indulge in the briscola?
Oh, gee, that's a real. That's getting deep. And I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I don't mind it being recorded. No. My wife and I never, we parted, but we're still friends, and always have been. And my children were reluctant to carry my name, so they carried their mother's. Their mother's name was which was Nicolacci.
Right.
And that's my family side of things find, and particularly Italians too, that they don't carry on their father's name. They find that difficulty, but I don't find any difficulty with it, because I want them to be happy. Yeah, so if they're happy with that name, that's fair enough. Whether the name Eckel dies, because it's not a very popular name in Australia, Eckel. There are not many families.
Yeah. Well, I confess I hadn't heard it.
No. Especially spelled my way, Eckel. Yeah. It goes back to 13th century on the Black Forest.
Oh, right.
So it's got its own emblem. What do you call it? Coat of arms.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So so from that perspective, and my children love anything Italian.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Love anything Italian.
That's great.
So they're not. They don't hide their heritage whatsoever. And in fact, one of my sons called his son Giovanni.
Right.
Yeah. So
Oh, that's good. And so you've got grandkids, and hopefully they'll become up. Well,
yeah, they're beautiful.
Tell your children about the conference if you're going to come. They might be able to join you there, which would be a good family break.
Wouldn't that be good?
Wouldn't it?
That'd be good,
yeah. And music is your love now, is it?
Yeah.
And obviously country music.
Yeah.
What about Italian music?
Absolutely love it. Do you want me to show you some?
Yeah, by all means.
You know my favourite?
No.
Ronaldo.
Yeah.
Robertino.
Oh, right.
Robertino Loretti.
Right.
Now, I've got them here together, in actual fact. I keep them together. Where are they? Can you put that on pause?
Yeah.
And that here. Yeah.
Okay.
Right, here we go. So my favourite Italian artist, is this is not the collection. I thought that was the collection. Is Robertino Loretti,
Right.
and I've got all those. Put on pause again.
Yeah.
Sorry
It's all
about
right.
that.
But you would have grown up back in the 60s certainly in Melbourne.
What we
There,
wanted.
there were a lot of young kids.
No, I didn't grow up in Melbourne. I was only born.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But the issue is.
Yeah.
The issue is, I used to, and I'll talk to you about this in a moment.
Yeah.
I used to close my door in my room
Right.
and play Italian records to myself
Right.
because I loved it so much. When
Yeah.
I kept them together. Where are they?